My name is Myra Ingram, and I recently celebrated my 32nd birthday. Roughly 3 weeks ago, my very own mother orchestrated a brutal trap. She brought 3 corporate attorneys into her living room with one goal in mind: to intimidate me into signing away the entire inheritance my late father had meant for me to have. She tried to disguise it as a casual family get-together, but let's be real, it was a calculated ambush. They assumed I would walk through that front door completely defenseless. They figured my knees would buckle the second they started throwing around complicated legal terminology and intimidating Latin phrases. They fully believed that the same daughter they had treated like a ghost for 2 straight decades would just meekly lower her head and scribble her signature on their dotted line. Well, they severely underestimated me. Before I dive into the crazy events of what happened next, do me a quick favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, but only if you are genuinely hooked by this story. Also, drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is over there. To really grasp why I was standing in the center of that tense living room, we have to rewind the clock 25 years to the era of my parents' messy divorce. I was merely 7 years old when my entire universe was fractured. My dad, Thomas Ingram, was a hardworking carpenter. His entire life was about crafting beautiful things with his bare hands: sturdy furniture, custom cabinets, and quiet dreams. But the one thing he absolutely could not construct was an adequate legal shield against my mother's vicious divorce attorneys. He simply lacked the funds to hire top-tier representation. Consequently, when the ink dried on the divorce papers, he had essentially been stripped of everything. My mother kept the family home. She secured full custody. All my dad walked away with was a visitation schedule granting him 2 weekends a month, along with a spirit weighed down by immense sorrow. I will never forget the final time he brought me back to my mother's porch after one of our designated weekends. He dropped to his knees right there on the concrete, his rough, calloused carpenter's hands resting softly on my tiny shoulders. "I want you to never forget this, my sweet girl," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Regardless of the stories people might tell you, I am always going to be right here. My love for you will never fade." At the time, I couldn't comprehend why tears were pooling in his eyes. I was only 7. In my innocent mind, I just assumed grown men cried every now and then. About 12 months later, my mother walked down the aisle again. A man named Richard Porter marched into our daily routine, bringing along his perfectly tailored suits and his teenage daughter, Melissa, from a previous relationship. In the blink of an eye, the entire dynamic of my home shifted permanently. It became an environment where I was the odd puzzle piece that didn't fit. Now, Richard wasn't physically abusive. He never raised his hand to me, and he never screamed in my face. His cruelty was much more silent. It was the kind of psychological mistreatment that leaves absolutely no visible marks, yet gouges massive holes into a child's self-worth. He simply navigated the house as though I did not exist. Whenever my mother hosted fancy dinner parties, she would parade the family around for her guests. "This is my wonderful husband, Richard, and here is our beautiful daughter, Melissa," she would boast. Then, almost like a reluctant footnote, she would gesture vaguely in my direction. "Oh, and that's Myra. She is from my first marriage." With every single repetition of that introduction, I felt my presence shrinking. I quickly figured out that the best survival tactic in that household was to make myself invisible. Blending into the wallpaper meant safety. It guaranteed fewer interrogations, fewer humiliating comparisons, and fewer instances where I failed to measure up to Melissa's glowing piano recital trophies or straight-A report cards. However, being invisible also meant I was entirely forgotten. The blatant favoritism within those walls was never kept under wraps. It was a well-oiled machine they maintained with pride. When I turned 16, I approached my mother to ask for a little bit of cash to cover my upcoming semester's school books. She stared at me with an expression of sheer disgust, as if I had just demanded a solid gold tiara. "Go ask your father," she scoffed. "He is the one who is supposed to be taking care of you." Ironically, that exact same week, Melissa was gifted a brand new vehicle for her 18th birthday. It was a gleaming silver Honda Civic, complete with a massive ceremonial bow resting on the hood. The entire extended family crowded into the driveway to watch her jump up and down with joy. I immediately went out and got a part-time job after classes, scrubbing greasy pots at a little diner down on 5th Street and pushing a lawnmower around the neighborhood. Every single paycheck I cashed felt like a tiny, secret revolution. Naturally, Richard picked up on my work ethic. She is the exact spitting image of her father, I heard him tell my mother one evening, not even attempting to whisper. She's destined to spend her entire life scrubbing up other people's messes. I played dumb and pretended I was out of earshot, but I caught every single word. I always did. The most painful memory, however, took place at my high school graduation. I had busted my tail to rank at the very top of my class in the mathematics department. It was a modest triumph, but it belonged entirely to me. I had zero expectations that my family would show up to support me, and they met those expectations perfectly. My mother conveniently forgot to send out invitations to our relatives. There were no beaming aunts, uncles, or cousins occupying the stadium bleachers for me. Yet, somebody did show up. Seated all the way in the very back row, sporting a worn-out brown coat that draped a little too loosely over his aging frame, was my dad, Thomas Ingram. When the principal called my name over the loudspeakers, my father cheered louder than any other parent in that building. I could literally hear his booming voice echoing above the roar of the crowd. Following the ceremony, he managed to track me down near the exits. His eyes were glistening with those familiar tears, identical to how he looked on that porch so many years prior. He secretly slid a thick envelope into my palm. "I've been stashing this away," he said in a hushed tone. "It's for your university tuition. Do not mention a word of this to your mother." I successfully guarded that secret for 14 long years, right up until the tragic day my dad passed away and all of our buried family secrets evolved into a massive hurricane. The life-altering phone call arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning at exactly 7:04 a.m. I was in the middle of pouring my morning cup of coffee when my cell phone vibrated with an unfamiliar caller ID. I was incredibly close to sending it to voicemail. I'd love to claim that I am thrilled I picked up, but reality is far messier than that. "Am I speaking with Ms. Myra Ingram?" The voice on the other end belonged to an older gentleman. It was perfectly calculated and distinctly professional. "My name is Harold Whitmore. I work as an estate attorney. I had the privilege of being your father's lawyer and his close friend." He paused heavily. "It brings me profound sorrow to inform you that Thomas Ingram passed away 3 days ago." His heart simply gave out. He passed very peacefully in his sleep. The ceramic mug literally slid right through my grip. I stared blankly as it plummeted to the floor in what felt like slow motion, the dark coffee exploding in a messy puddle all over my clean white kitchen tiles. My body was completely paralyzed. 3 days. My own father had been dead for 72 hours. "Miss Ingram? Are you still on the line? Who else is aware of this?" My own voice sounded like it belonged to a total stranger. "Your mother was officially notified, as well as her current husband. They were informed immediately." Of course they were. And not a single soul in that house had bothered to pick up the phone to tell me. Not one text message. Not one brief voicemail. My beloved dad had died, and I was finding out through a random professional. "Mr. Whitmore," I managed to say, gripping the edge of my kitchen island to keep from collapsing. "Why exactly are you calling me?" "Your father formulated a will, Miss Ingram. And it is incredibly specific. You are listed as his sole, exclusive beneficiary. I need you to come into my office so we can go over the particulars." Sole beneficiary. My brain refused to process the phrase. My dad was a blue-collar woodworker. He resided in a tiny, unassuming property and drove a beat-up truck that was 15 years past its prime. There had to be a mix-up. "There is absolutely no mistake," Harold assured me, his tone growing a fraction warmer. "Thomas was meticulously intentional regarding this matter. He forced me to swear that I would locate you before anybody else had the chance. Furthermore, Miss Ingram, he explicitly instructed me to warn you against speaking to anyone in your family regarding our upcoming meeting." He was extremely adamant about that. My pulse was hammering against my ribs. "Why?" "Because he knew without a shadow of a doubt that they would try to steal it from you." Harold Whitmore's workspace carried the distinct, comforting aroma of antique paper and rich mahogany polish. It was the exact kind of atmosphere that automatically made you feel secure. He looked a bit more senior than I had pictured in my head. He had a full head of silver hair, wore thin wire glasses, and possessed the deeply lined face of an attorney who had witnessed way too many bloodlines rip each other to shreds over money. He offered me a seat with a polite wave of his hand. Resting right in the center of his massive oak desk was an incredibly thick manila folder. "Your dad originally walked into my practice 23 years ago," Harold initiated the conversation. It was immediately following his divorce proceedings. He desperately wanted to guarantee that if tragedy ever struck, you would be fully taken care of. He unclasped the file. Sitting right on top was a legally binding last will and testament, accompanied by stacks of banking records, property deeds, and old photographs. He owns the residence over on Maple Street, currently appraising at around $550,000, Harold read off the documents. There is also a high-yield savings account holding roughly $180,000, plus various personal assets. Harold peered over his lenses to look me directly in the eye. The aggregate value of his estate sits just shy of $800,000. All the air rushed right out of my lungs. That can't be right. My dad was just a simple carpenter. He was a highly intelligent carpenter who decided to sell off his main commercial workshop 15 years ago and funnel those profits into brilliant investments, Harold corrected gently. Mostly small residential rentals. He chose to live a remarkably frugal lifestyle so that he could stockpile this wealth for your future. He absolutely never dipped into the principal funds. It was his greatest wish that you inherit every single penny. Tears instantly blurred my vision. I thought back to all the decades he spent cooped up in that tiny one-bedroom shack, commuting in that rusted jalopy, and wearing that same faded jacket to my graduation ceremony. He easily possessed the funds to live in luxury. He deliberately chose not to. Harold then pushed one final object toward me. It was a tightly sealed envelope, featuring my name scrawled in my dad's unmistakable handwriting. He requested that I hand this to you when the inevitable day arrived. However, Myra, Harold paused, choosing his words carefully. He also gave strict orders that you are not to tear this open until you desperately need to. He promised me that you will know when the time is right. I gently grabbed the envelope. Physically, it weighed next to nothing, yet it carried an emotional gravity heavier than anything else inside that office. "There is one final matter," Harold sighed heavily. "Your mother. She is already making aggressive inquiries." The radio silence from my family persisted for exactly 1 week. And then, the barrage began. My Aunt Linda was the first to strike. She was my mother's younger sibling, the type of woman who bathed in cheap floral perfume and spent family holidays gossiping in hushed tones. "Myra, sweetheart," her voice oozed with heavily rehearsed sympathy. "I just got the awful news regarding your poor father. It's a horrible tragedy. But I also caught wind. Well, rumor has it there is a substantial amount of wealth involved." I refused to utter a single word. "Honey, your poor mother is completely devastated. She genuinely feels like you are isolating the family during a time of grief. Don't you agree that it would be best to divide up whatever Thomas left behind? She was, after all, his wife once." I ended the call immediately. My Uncle Robert was the next to ring. Following him came my cousin Denise, and then a whole parade of distant relatives I hadn't interacted with in over a decade. All of them miraculously managed to find my cell number, and every single one recited the exact same talking points. "Your mother is falling apart. Blood relatives need to stay united. Thomas would have begged you to distribute the wealth." Would he really? My mind kept drifting back to that sealed letter sitting in my bedroom drawer. I kept replaying Harold's chilling warning. He knew they would try to steal it from you. Eventually, the ringleader herself decided to dial my number. It was late on a Thursday, and my mother's tone was sickeningly sugary. It was the exact type of fake sweetness she used to deploy right before she delivered a harsh punishment when I was a kid. "Myra, my darling. I've been trying to get a hold of you for days. I heard all about the will." "Who gave you that information?" I asked. She completely sidestepped my question. "We desperately need to sit down and discuss this as a united front. Your dad and I spent 9 long years in a marriage. Any wealth he managed to accumulate, I helped lay the foundation for. You are a smart girl. Surely you can see the logic in that. The legal documents state otherwise, I replied coldly. A heavy silence lingered on the line. When she spoke again, the fake warmth had vanished. We are going to meet up and sort this out properly. I am hosting a family gathering this weekend. My place, Saturday at 2 o'clock. All right, I conceded. And Myra, she added, her voice dropping into a sharp threat. Do not act stubborn about this. We are your blood. This entire ordeal can be smoothed over gracefully as long as you play ball. Sleep completely evaded me that evening. There was a heavy anticipation in the air, a storm was brewing, and my instincts were screaming at me. Prior to the grand weekend ambush, I foolishly agreed to grab a coffee with my mother. She pitched it as an intimate, one-on-one chat to clear the air. Naturally, she didn't show up alone. When I walked into the local cafe, Richard was already firmly planted in a booth, his arms folded tightly across his chest, looking like an arrogant nightclub bouncer. My mother slid in right next to him, her features carefully molded into the mask of a deeply wounded parent. Myra, sweetie, she cooed, pointing at the vacant seat across from them. Please sit. Richard felt strongly about being here for this. You don't have a problem with that, right? I absolutely had a problem with it, but I took the seat anyway. Richard didn't bother warming up. He leaned aggressively over the table, the sharp stench of his cologne burning my nose. Let's drop the pleasantries and get to the point, Myra. Your father is dead. He left you a nice little payday. Good for you. But your mother gave up the best years of her life to raise you. She is entitled to her cut of that money. Her cut of what exactly? I asked. The total estate. We've run the numbers, and we're looking at a 70-30 split. You walk away with 30%. Just sign the paperwork, and everybody goes home happy. I shifted my gaze to my mother. She purposefully stared at her coffee cup, refusing to make eye contact. My dad legally assigned everything to me, I stated softly but firmly. That was his final decision. His decision? Richard barked out a cruel laugh. The guy is rotting in the ground. What he wanted doesn't mean a damn thing anymore. A freezing sensation anchored itself deep in my stomach. It means everything to me. 70-30, Myra, Richard growled, dropping his voice into a menacing register. That is the absolute best offer you're going to get. No. He blinked, looking legitimately shocked, as if the concept of me standing up to him was scientifically impossible. Excuse me. I said no. I pushed my chair back and stood tall. The will is completely ironclad. The decision is final. We have nothing left to discuss. I pivoted and headed straight for the exit. Behind me, the loud screech of Richard pushing his chair violently across the cafe floor echoed in the room. You are going to regret doing this, he bellowed, totally uncaring that every patron in the shop was now staring at us. Listen to me, you have absolutely no clue what kind of war you're starting. I never looked back, but I made sure to burn his threat into my memory. Later on, I would be incredibly thankful that I did. Following the disastrous cafe encounter, the psychological warfare officially kicked off. They were far too cowardly to confront me to my face again. That wasn't how they operated. Instead, they weaponized our entire family tree, recruiting aunts, uncles, and cousins to serve as foot soldiers in a conflict I never asked for. My smartphone basically turned into a ticking time bomb meant to destroy my mental health. The digital accusations flooded in. Aunt Linda texted, "Your mother has been sobbing for 3 days straight. Have you really become this monstrous?" Uncle Robert chimed in, "Thomas would be absolutely horrified by your greed. I hope you realize that." Even distant relatives I hadn't hugged since childhood called me horrific names that I won't even dignify by repeating. The grand finale was the inevitable Facebook essay. Somebody, I never cared to figure out exactly who, drafted a massive, tear-jerking manifesto in the main family group. The post meticulously framed me as an opportunistic, money-hungry monster who manipulated an elderly man into changing his will, completely abandoning her loving mother, and refusing to hand over a single dime to the very people who kept a roof over her head. The comment section was a bloodbath. Old family acquaintances smashed the angry react button. One relative even uploaded a throwback picture of me from my teenage years and slapped a nasty caption on it, This is the face of true betrayal. I took high-resolution screenshots of absolutely everything. Every vile comment, every threatening text, every deranged post. I wasn't completely sure why I was documenting it at the time. Perhaps it was purely instinctual. But Harold's voice echoed in the back of my mind. He knew they would try to steal it from you. Even my stepsister Melissa finally broke her silence. You are literally destroying this family, Myra. Mom is having a breakdown. Why are you acting so evil toward us? I typed out a furious defense, quickly erased it, drafted a second one, and finally settled on the simple truth. I haven't done a single malicious thing. I am simply declining to hand over a gift that my father specifically gave to me. She read it and never replied. Following that exchange, the family went entirely dark for 14 days. No ringtones, no notifications, absolute nothingness. Honestly, the quiet was far more terrifying than the verbal abuse, because I knew silence meant they were busy loading their weapons. The trap was sprung on a Wednesday afternoon. When my mother called, her entire demeanor had morphed. She sounded entirely robotic, strictly professional, abandoning all pretenses of being a caring mom. Myra, we are having a mandatory family meeting. This Saturday, 2 o'clock sharp at my residence. What exactly is left to talk about? I asked. The future, she replied after a chilling pause. And how we are all going to proceed. Richard and I, well, the family feels there is a path forward where we can resolve this smoothly without getting lawyers or the court system involved. Just us, like a real family. The specific way she emphasized the word lawyers made my blood run cold. It sounded entirely too scripted. Fine. I will be there. Excellent. Was she actually gloating? And Myra, make sure you walk in ready to compromise. We strictly want a peaceful outcome for everybody. The second the call disconnected, I dialed Harold's number. They want a formal sit-down, I reported. Saturday afternoon. She specifically claimed we could handle it without attorneys. Harold remained quiet for several seconds. If she went out of her way to bring up lawyers unprompted, then she absolutely has legal counsel hired. You can bet your life on it. What is our play here? You need to show up, and you need to have me on standby. If the situation turns hostile, you send me a text message. I will walk through the front door. I felt a knot forming in my throat. What kind of hostility are we talking about? I am fully anticipating severe coercion, Harold explained calmly. They are going to try and bully you. They will disguise their threats as family concern. They will likely shove paperwork in your face, documents deliberately drafted to look harmless, but are legally disastrous. Listen to me very closely, Myra. Do not put your signature on a single piece of paper. Do not verbally agree to any compromises. And above all else, do not let them see you lose your temper. They want you to act irrational. I flashed back to Richard's aggressive taunt in the cafe. You have absolutely no clue what kind of war you're starting. Harold, I whispered into the receiver. Did my dad actually predict it would get this ugly? Your father spent 2 solid decades building a fortress for this exact moment. Harold took a deep breath. He loved you more than life itself, Myra. And nobody on this earth understood the true nature of your mother better than he did. Later that evening, sitting in the quiet of my apartment, I finally pulled the sealed envelope out of my drawer. It was time. I tore open the paper flap. The page inside was completely covered in my dad's familiar script. The letters were a little shakier than I remembered, reflecting his older age, but it was undeniably the same handwriting from all my childhood birthday cards. My precious Myra, if your eyes are reading these words, it means I have passed on. And if Harold instructed you to open this, it means your mother has launched her attack. I always knew in my gut that she would. Leopards never change their spots. There is a dark truth I hid from you your entire life. While our divorce was unfolding, your mother viciously threatened to sever my access to you forever. No weekend visits, no phone calls, absolute zero contact. She had a ruthless attorney friend who promised he could easily manipulate the judge to make it happen. I was paralyzed with fear. You were only 7 years old, so I caved. I signed away the marital home, my entire life savings, every single asset, just so I could secure those precious 2 weekends a month with you. I gave it all up just to ensure I could watch my little girl grow up. I was a coward for surrendering. I should have taken her to trial. That specific regret has haunted my every waking moment. But I am making damn sure you do not repeat my failures. I refuse to let you submit to individuals who view you as nothing more than an obstacle. Every single countermeasure has been deployed. Harold possesses an ironclad legal portfolio, the will, exhaustive psychiatric evaluations confirming my sanity, and every protective injunction legally available. More importantly, he is holding onto audio recordings. Things your mother said in private that she thought would remain buried forever. Put your faith in Harold. Put your faith in your own strength. And always look back on what I promised you on that porch. I am right here. I love you. Do not let these parasites steal what rightfully belongs to you. I don't mean the cash, that's meaningless paper. Do not let them strip away your pride. Your absolute right to stand up for yourself. That is the true inheritance I'm leaving behind. Forever yours, Dad. I remained seated in the pitch black for hours after reading that letter. I clutched the paper to my chest as hot tears poured down my cheeks. He knew. He had foreseen every single maneuver. Even from the afterlife, my father was still acting as my shield. First thing Friday morning, I marched into Harold's office for our ultimate war council. He had completely covered his large conference table with legal files, looking like a brilliant general mapping out a battlefield. He had the fully notarized will, multiple affidavits from independent witnesses, heavy stacks of banking ledgers, and property titles. Everything was flawlessly organized and legally impenetrable. Their primary angle of attack will be questioning your father's mental acuity, Harold explained, tapping a pen on the desk. They will try to argue he was suffering from dementia. They likely coerced a family member into testifying that he was losing his memory and was easily scammed. Aunt Linda, I guessed instantly. She would happily commit perjury for my mother. Well, let them try, because we have this. Harold triumphantly lifted a manila folder. A comprehensive psychiatric clearance performed by Dr. Patricia Morrison just 8 weeks prior to Thomas's passing. It's a massive cognitive review. Your dad passed with a perfect score. There isn't a probate judge in the state of California who would throw this out. He then placed a tiny USB flash drive onto the table. 47 vicious text messages. 23 recorded voicemails. 15 defamatory social media posts. A complete archive of a targeted, malicious harassment campaign aimed directly at my client. Harold locked eyes with me. If they try to paint themselves as the heartbroken victims, we have undeniable evidence proving they are the hostile aggressors. I stared down at the small piece of plastic. My dad specifically instructed you to hoard all of this? Your dad ordered me to arm ourselves for World War III, Harold said softly. He prayed to God it wouldn't reach this boiling point, but he knew exactly what his ex-wife and her new husband were capable of. He wanted to make sure you were holding the big guns. What happens if they actually have corporate lawyers sitting in that living room tomorrow? Then I crashed the party. Harold handed me his sleek business card. Keep your phone in your palm. The exact second you spot legal representation, shoot me a text with the word "now." I will be idling my car exactly 2 streets over. I inhaled deeply to steady my nerves. Is there anything else I need to remember? Yes. Harold leaned in close. No matter what toxic insults they hurl at you, no matter what heinous lies they tell, you must remain a statue. Do not engage. Do not raise your voice by a single decibel. Do not let them see you shed a tear. You cannot give them a shred of ammunition. He smiled warmly. Your dad always bragged that you were a fiercely resilient woman. Tomorrow afternoon, you're going to validate his pride. I nodded slowly. Whether I felt brave or not, the war had officially arrived. Saturday rolled around. At precisely 1:55 p.m., I parked my car in front of my mother's property, my heart aggressively hammering against my ribcage. Exactly as planned, I spotted Harold's vehicle discreetly parked a couple of blocks down the road. It felt like a massive safety net. The house appeared as picturesque as it always did. Crisp white paneling, a perfectly cut lawn, the quintessential American dream tightly packaged behind a charming little fence. I had wasted my entire youth desperate to find acceptance inside that building. Today, it simply looked like a hostile fortress. I marched up the porch steps, but before my knuckles even grazed the wood, the front door violently pulled open. My mother stood in the threshold, sporting a smile that was far too wide and meticulously rehearsed. "Myra, you made it." She swooped in to wrap her arms around me. I kept my arms pinned to my sides. "Come on inside, darling. The whole group is eagerly awaiting you." She wasn't exaggerating. The living room was absolutely packed. My mother and Richard immediately claimed the massive center couch. Aunt Linda was nervously perched on the edge of a recliner, purposefully staring at the carpet to avoid my gaze. Uncle Robert was positioned defensively by the curtains with his arms crossed. In the far corner, Melissa was intensely focused on her smartphone screen. However, my eyes immediately locked onto the three completely unfamiliar individuals occupying the dining room table. Two men draped in heavily tailored, incredibly expensive suits, and one woman gripping a leather portfolio. The dining table was completely bare, save for massive stacks of legal contracts and a blinking digital audio recorder right in the center. My mother tracked my line of sight, her plastic smile never slipping. "Myra, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Stevens and Mr. Martinez. They are our legal counsel. And this lovely lady is their paralegal." She gracefully pointed toward a solitary, isolated chair positioned directly across from them. "Please take a seat, sweetheart. We have some important family business to hammer out." I refused to sit down. "I recall you explicitly promising this was just going to be a family meeting." "It absolutely is," Richard interjected, his voice dripping with arrogant satisfaction. "We are simply taking precautions to ensure everything is put down on paper legally." I scanned the room, the contracts, the blinking red light of the recorder, the two high-priced attorneys who cowardly refused to look me in the eye. This was exactly what Dad warned me about. This was an execution by firing squad, and they were banking on the fact that I had walked in without a bulletproof vest. The silver-haired attorney, Mr. Stevens, broke the silence. He possessed a terrifyingly calm demeanor, the aura of a man who easily billed $1,000 an hour. "Miss Ingram, we sincerely appreciate your attendance this afternoon." He casually flipped open a thick binder, dragging out the suspense. "Our firm has been retained by your mother, Mrs. Diane Porter, regarding the execution of the Thomas Ingram estate." I maintained my stoic posture and kept my mouth shut. "We have been made aware that the documentation naming you as the sole heir is highly contestable." Stevens tapped a manicured finger against his notes. "We have compiled substantial grounds to argue that Mr. Thomas Ingram lacked the necessary cognitive capacity when he authorized that paperwork. We already have sworn witnesses ready to take the stand and testify regarding his severe mental deterioration over the last few years." Right on cue, Aunt Linda nervously shifted her weight, still hyper-focused on her shoes. The second lawyer, Martinez, leaned aggressively across the table. "Look, we are fully prepared to drag this into a brutal probate litigation. Those courtroom battles can span decades, Miss Ingram. By the time the judge bangs the gavel, our legal fees alone will have eaten up over half of the cash. In that scenario, everybody loses." However, Stevens smoothly picked up the routine. "There is a highly elegant alternative. A peaceful family compromise. You voluntarily sign a relinquishment waiver, reallocating 80% of the total assets to your mother. You walk away with 20%. It's painless, it's efficient, and it allows this family to heal and move forward. 80%. Not the 70 they had demanded over coffee. Their greed had exponentially multiplied. "So, you're effectively demanding that I hand over $600,000, I stated, my voice deadpan. "We are simply suggesting that you act like a reasonable adult," Stevens countered smoothly, sliding a massive brick of legal documents across the glossy wood table. "The paperwork is finalized right here. Feel free to skim the clauses, but I assure you it is completely standard." I peered down at the top sheet. Printed in massive, bold typography were the words, "Voluntary relinquishment of inheritance rights." My mother was staring at me with terrifying, hungry eyes. Richard was flashing a predatory grin that made my stomach churn. "Well," Stevens impatiently clicked his expensive pen. "Do we have a mutual understanding?" I slowly picked up the stack of papers, casually flipping through the dense legalese. And then, defying every instinct they expected from me, I broke into a genuine smile. My reaction clearly short-circuited their brains. Richard was the first one to snap. "What the hell is so amusing?" he barked, launching himself off the sofa, his face turning an angry shade of purple. "You honestly believe you hold any cards here? You are absolutely nothing, Myra. You're an irrelevant nobody with a worthless degree slaving away at a dead-end job. You stumble into a little bit of dead man's cash, and suddenly you think you are royalty." "Richard, please," my mother fake pleaded. "No, Diane, shut up. She needs a reality check." He aggressively pointed a finger an inch from my face. "You are identical to your pathetic father. Ignorant and painfully stubborn. He wasted his miserable life doing manual labor for his betters, and he croaked all by himself in that disgusting little shack. That is the exact future waiting for you, little girl. That's the hill you're choosing to die on." Aunt Linda aggressively nodded along. "He is speaking the truth, Myra. You have been a nasty, difficult burden since you were a toddler." "Incredibly selfish," Uncle Robert chimed in from his corner. "You only know how to take. My mother whipped out a tissue and began forcefully dabbing at the corners of her eyes. If you didn't know her, the tears looked Oscar-worthy. But I had witnessed those exact crocodile tears enough times to know the script by heart. "I sacrificed my body and soul to raise you," she whimpered, her voice quivering with fake agony. "I poured my heart out to provide you with a loving home after your father completely abandoned you." "He never abandoned me," I shot back smoothly. "And this is the thanks I get," she wailed. "You hoard money that rightfully belongs to the family that fed you?" Stevens loudly cleared his throat to regain control of the room. "Miss Ingram, I strongly suggest you drop the defiance and evaluate your reality. Attempting to validate this will in court will utterly bankrupt you. And once we present the witness testimony confirming your father's dementia, you will lose everything." He gently pushed the pen toward my hand. "Just sign the forms. Bow out with a shred of dignity." I slowly surveyed the battlefield. I looked at my mother's manufactured sobbing, Richard's violent hostility, and the toxic relatives who had spent 20 years making sure I felt worthless. They had planned a flawless execution. They brought high-priced muscle, false witnesses, and intense psychological pressure. They had thought of absolutely everything. Except for one massive flaw. "You know what?" I said, keeping my tone remarkably casual as I pulled my cell phone from my pocket. "I actually think it's wise to bring in a second legal opinion." I typed out the 3 letters NOW and slammed the send button. Richard let out a booming, mocking laugh. "What exactly are you doing? Texting your little loser friends to come rescue you? Wake up, Myra. Nobody is coming to save you." "I wouldn't bet your life on that," I replied calmly. For 2 agonizing minutes, the room was suffocated by silence. Stevens and Martinez shot each other a look of mild panic. My mother's confident smirk slowly evaporated. Then, the doorbell chimed. Every single person in the living room turned to stone. My mother wildly looked at Richard. Richard glared at the attorneys, and the attorneys exchanged a look of pure dread. "Don't worry, I'll grab it," I announced, easily pushing myself up from the chair. "Sit your ass back down," Richard roared, but I was already twisting the deadbolt. Harold Whitmore confidently stepped over the threshold. He looked like an absolute force of nature in his tailored charcoal gray suit, gripping a heavy leather briefcase. From behind his wire glasses, his eyes scanned the room with terrifying precision. "Good afternoon to you all," Harold projected, his authoritative voice instantly commanding the space. "I sincerely apologize if I'm interrupting a private gathering." He casually strolled right past me and planted himself in the center of the living room. The dynamic shift was instantaneous and violent. Stevens immediately stiffened his spine. Martinez lost his smug grin. My mother looked like she had just seen a ghost. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harold announced, dropping his heavy briefcase onto the coffee table with a loud thud. "My name is Harold Whitmore. I am a fully licensed, board-certified estate attorney practicing in the state of California. For the last 2.5 decades, I possess the immense honor of representing the legal interests of the late Thomas Ingram." He took a dramatic, purposeful pause. "Effective immediately, I am acting as the primary legal counsel for his daughter, Myra Ingram." Richard was the first to choke out a response. "Listen up, buddy. This is a closed-door family dispute. which has now clearly escalated into a formal legal standoff featuring representation from both parties. Harold countered flawlessly, snapping the latches of his briefcase open. It has been brought to my attention that you are raising challenges regarding the validity of Mr. Ingram's last will. I am absolutely thrilled to dismantle those concerns. He smoothly pulled out the massive manila folder, the USB flash drive, and the sealed envelope. My mother stared at the objects as if they were venomous snakes ready to strike. Now then, Harold said, casually dropping into the seat I had refused to take, looking completely unfazed. Where would you boys like to begin? The ambush had just been spectacularly ambushed. I need to hit pause on the story right here for just a second, because I am genuinely curious. If you were sitting in that living room, surrounded by a family that viewed you as nothing more than a human ATM, what would your move be? Would you have caved under the pressure just to keep the peace and buy their fake love? Or would you have dug your heels in and fought back? Drop your brutal honesty in the comments section below. And if you are hyped to hear how Harold utterly destroyed them, make sure you've smashed that subscribe button, because the next 5 minutes change the trajectory of my entire life. Harold peeled open his master file with the terrifying precision of a combat surgeon. Let us address your primary threat, the absurd allegation that Thomas Ingram was mentally compromised when he signed his legal documents. He smoothly slid a thick medical packet across the table until it bumped against Stephen's hand. This is a sworn, legally binding psychiatric assessment administered by Dr. Patricia Morrison, one of the most respected board-certified psychiatrists on the West Coast. This was conducted a mere 8 weeks before my client's father passed away. It is an exhaustive cognitive audit covering short-term memory, logical reasoning, and complex decision-making capabilities. Stevens reluctantly scanned the top page, and I watched the color rapidly drain from his cheeks. The medical verdict, Harold continued, his voice ringing with absolute authority, is crystal clear. Thomas Ingram was functioning at a perfect cognitive level. There isn't a single judge sitting on a California bench who would entertain throwing this document out. Your heavily coached family witnesses will be utterly annihilated during my cross-examination. Over in the corner, Aunt Linda practically morphed into the armchair, suddenly finding the lint on her sweater to be the most fascinating thing in the world. Moving on, Harold stated, slapping another set of documents down. The will itself was drafted and executed in absolute, flawless adherence to California Probate Code Section 6110. It features the signatures of 2 fully independent, non-affiliated witnesses and a licensed notary. It is legally bulletproof. He snapped his gaze over to Martinez. You attempted to use probate litigation as a scare tactic. I openly invite you to file the paperwork. We will crush you in the hearings and immediately file a massive countersuit against your firm for pursuing frivolous and malicious litigation. My mother let out a strangled, pathetic gasp. Harold, please. We are all rational adults here. Surely we can negotiate. We are acting with perfect rationality, Mrs. Porter, Harold fired back, his tone freezing the room. A rational person would acknowledge that you possess zero legal standing. A rational person knows this will is ironclad. And a rational person accepts that your daughter is walking away with every single asset her father desired her to have. Stevens nervously held up both of his hands in surrender. Mr. Whitmore, there is no need for hostilities. I'm sure we can locate a middle ground that satisfies everyone. There is absolutely no middle ground to be found here, Harold stated, glaring at every single person in the room. Thomas Ingram spent 20 long years meticulously fortifying his estate for this exact confrontation. He knew precisely which vultures would swoop in to steal his daughter's inheritance, and he made damn sure you would leave empty-handed. A suffocating silence blanketed the room. The 2 corporate lawyers nervously avoided eye contact. My mother was violently twisting her tissue into shreds. Now, Harold casually leaned back. Shall I continue dismantling your lives, or do you boys need a timeout? Nobody dared to breathe. Harold reached down and plucked the tiny USB drive off the table, holding it up to the light. This tiny device holds exactly 47 text messages, 23 recorded phone calls, and 15 social media publications. He let it drop back onto the wood with a sharp clack. It is an exhaustive, heavily documented archive of a vicious, coordinated harassment campaign launched directly at my client. It features blatant threats, severe defamation, and rampant emotional abuse, committed by nearly every single individual occupying this room. Aunt Linda looked like she was about to vomit. Uncle Robert uncrossed his arms and took a massive step away from the window, looking terrified. "Let's review the law," Harold preached like a furious professor. California Civil Code Section 1708.7 addresses stalking and coordinated harassment. Sections 45 and 46 cover defamation and slander. And let's not forget the gold standard, intentional infliction of severe emotional distress. He slowly turned his head to lock eyes with my mother. "If you force us into a courtroom, Mrs. Porter, I promise you I will not simply play defense. I will rain down hellfire with civil counterclaims. I will legally subpoena your private cell phone records. I will subpoena your Facebook servers. Every single nasty little threat you've typed in the last 90 days will become public court record." Richard slammed his massive fist onto the table, shaking the audio recorder. "This is a bluff. You cannot see your own blood relatives for getting into an argument." "I absolutely can," Harold replied, not blinking. "And I guarantee you I will. The mountain of evidence is indisputable. Would you boys like to review the printed transcripts where they explicitly refer to my client as a greedy parasite? I have them fully categorized by date and time." My mother whipped her head toward Stevens, her carefully crafted facade shattering into pieces. "Well, do something. Fix this." Stevens slowly began packing his files back into his briefcase. He looked exactly like a captain realizing his ship was already halfway underwater. "Mrs. Porter, I strongly believe our legal strategy requires a massive reassessment." He quickly glanced at his partner. "Martinez, we should excuse ourselves and deliberate in private." "A brilliant tactical retreat," Harold mocked. "Oh, and while you boys are out there reassessing your lives, you might want to factor this in. Thomas Ingram was an avid fan of recording conversations. He possessed a beautifully preserved cassette tape from the year 2001, where Mrs. Porter explicitly threatened to permanently block him from ever seeing his child again unless he legally forfeited every penny of their marital assets to her." My mother's horrified gasp was so loud it echoed off the ceiling. "Any final inquiries?" Harold asked the room. The entire scheme collapsed. Stevens and Martinez scrambled out of their chairs, violently shoving their papers into their bags with the frantic energy of men fleeing a burning building. The terrified paralegal was already halfway out the front door. "Mrs. Porter, our firm will contact you on Monday," Stevens muttered, refusing to look back. "We highly advise you to seek alternative representation moving forward." The three legal mercenaries vanished, the heavy oak door slamming shut behind them. Over by the couch, Aunt Linda completely broke down into ugly, heavy sobs. And these were genuine tears, not the theatrical garbage my mother had tried to pull. "Diane, you swore to us that Thomas's brain was gone." Linda shrieked at my mother. "You looked me in the eye and said he was completely senile. You said he was tricked." "Shut your damn mouth, Linda," my mother screamed, her mask finally gone. Her features were contorted into an ugly mask of pure hatred as she turned her wrath toward Harold. "You honestly think you're some kind of hero? You think you defeated me?" She violently pointed her finger at my chest. "She came from my womb. That wealth belongs to me. I suffered through 9 miserable years of marriage to that loser." "You threatened to erase a father from his 7-year-old daughter's life," Harold corrected, his voice dangerously low. "Unless he paid your ransom." "That is not suffering, Diane. That is felony extortion." Uncle Robert cautiously stepped into the center of the room. "Diane, is that actually what happened?" His voice was completely broken. "You preached to us for 20 years that Thomas selfishly walked out on you. You claimed he abandoned his own daughter." "He did not abandon us," Harold firmly corrected. He placed his hand on the latches of his briefcase. "I have the digitized audio recording right here. Care for a listening party?" And oh, my mother shrieked at the top of her lungs. Her entire body was violently trembling, makeup running down her cheeks. "No, get the hell out of my property. Both of you, get out now." I glanced over toward the staircase. Melissa was frozen in place, her smartphone dangling limply from her fingers. All the color had vanished from her face. She was staring at her mother with an expression I had never witnessed before. It was a mixture of pure horror and devastating realization. "Mom," Melissa whispered, her voice cracking. "What kind of monster are you?" My mother had absolutely no response. She couldn't manufacture a lie fast enough. The brutal, ugly truth had finally flooded the room, and all her toxic secrets had nowhere left to hide. Harold and I rode in complete silence for a solid 10 minutes before my vocal cords finally started working again. "Thank you." It felt like the most inadequate phrase in the English language. "Harold, if you hadn't walked through that door." "I simply executed the battle plan your father drew up," Harold replied humbly, keeping his eyes locked on the road ahead. My phone vibrated in my lap. It was a lengthy text from Uncle Robert. "I am profoundly sorry, Myra. I was completely blind to the truth. I should have acted like a man and asked you for your side of the story instead of blindly trusting her lies. Please let me know if we can ever sit down and talk." 30 seconds later, another notification popped up. "Aunt Linda, I was so incredibly wrong about you. And I was wrong about a lot of history. Please forgive me." I held the screen up for Harold to read. He gave a slow, knowing nod. When the absolute truth hits the light, it has a funny way of shifting people's alliances. Later that evening, we camped out in Harold's office, mapping out the immediate future. The checklist was extensive: change every deadbolt on my father's property, upgrade the digital security grid, and meticulously document any attempts at communication from Richard or my mother. "They are not going to swallow this defeat gracefully," Harold cautioned, rubbing his tired eyes. "Narcissists never do. Richard is the wild card. He has a notoriously explosive temper, and you just humiliated him in front of his wife's entire bloodline." "What exactly can they do to me?" I asked. "You proved the will is legally impenetrable. In a courtroom? They can't do a damn thing." Harold took off his glasses. "But the law doesn't stop people from acting dangerously in the real world. Your dad understood that reality. It is exactly why he paid top dollar to have that cutting-edge security system hardwired into his house." He paused. "It is fully operational, by the way. Cloud-based video backups, thermal motion sensors. I still have the master access to the live feed." I pictured the terrifying vein popping out of Richard's forehead during the ambush. "Do you genuinely believe they would resort to physical violence?" "I just want you to stay on high alert. At least until the anger burns itself out." Right before I went to sleep, my screen lit up with one final message. "Melissa, I am not going to insult you by asking for your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I am permanently washing my hands of them. And Myra, please watch your back. Dad was throwing back liquor all night. He was ranting about how you humiliated his pride and how he's going to make you pay. I am genuinely terrified for you." The anger hadn't burned itself out. It was just finding a spark. A bizarre, tense silence dominated the following 2 weeks. No angry voicemails, no threatening texts, no Facebook drama. Logically, it should have felt like a massive victory lap. Emotionally, it felt exactly like the suffocating calm that immediately precedes a devastating hurricane. I began spending my evenings at my dad's place, which was legally my house now. I spent hours sorting through his personal belongings, slowly preparing to officially move my life into those walls. Opening his drawers felt like having delayed conversations with him. I found stacks of faded photographs, crinkled receipts from local lumber yards, and a chipped ceramic mug declaring him the world's best dad. On a Tuesday night, right around 11 p.m., my cell phone emitted a sharp, blaring alarm. It was a push notification from the security app Harold had linked to my phone. "Motion detected. Front yard." My pulse instantly skyrocketed. I frantically tapped the notification, loading the live infrared feed. A massive, dark pickup truck was idling right next to the curb. The headlights were totally killed, but the heavy rumble of the engine was picked up by the microphone. The heavily tinted windows made it impossible to identify the driver, but I didn't need to see a face. I recognized the lifted suspension and custom grille. It was Richard's Ford F-150. For 15 agonizing minutes, the massive truck just sat there, lurking in the shadows. I watched the screen, terrified to even exhale, as the cloud server recorded every single second of the intimidation tactic. Eventually, the brake lights flashed, and the truck slowly crept away, disappearing into the suburban darkness. I immediately rang Harold. It could just be a pure intimidation play, Harold analyzed, though I could hear the tension vibrating in his voice. He might just be trying to figure out if you've permanently moved into the property yet. Call the local precinct right now. File a suspicious vehicle report. We need to start building a fresh paper trail. I followed his instructions. The patrol officer who eventually knocked on my door was courteous, but entirely unbothered. Honestly, ma'am, parking on a public street isn't a criminal offense. We will throw a note into the system. Give dispatch a ring if the situation escalates. Escalates? I wanted to scream. Escalates into what? A home invasion? An assault? The very next morning, another chilling text from Melissa came through. He is completely unhinged. He's been drinking heavy liquor every single night. Mom isn't even trying to stop him. He keeps mumbling that you stole what belongs to them and that you need to be taught a permanent lesson. I stared at the terrifying text for a solid minute before mechanically dropping a screenshot into my legal evidence folder. The catastrophic alert jolted me entirely awake at 3:07 a.m. I frantically scrambled for my phone in the dark, my adrenaline spiking so hard my vision blurred. Motion detected. Front porch. I forced the live feed to load. Two individuals draped in jet black hoodies and dark sweatpants were moving aggressively across the lawn. One of the figures was lugging a heavy, bulky object. As they stepped into the ambient glow of the street lamp, my stomach completely dropped. It was a massive red plastic jug. A gasoline container. No. I watched in pure, paralyzed horror as the first figure began wildly splashing the liquid everywhere. They drenched the beautiful wooden railing my father had spent weeks carving, soaked the front steps, and dumped the remainder into the perfectly manicured bushes. The second individual was playing lookout, their head frantically snapping back and forth to check for witnesses. Suddenly, the first figure reached into their pocket and produced a silver lighter. I was already screaming my exact address to the 911 dispatcher before the small flame even ignited. They're actively trying to burn my house down. 742 Maple Street. I am watching them on my security cameras right now. The tiny flame dropped onto the wood. Instantly, the entire front porch exploded into a massive wall of vicious orange and yellow fire. The flames began rapidly devouring the beautiful woodwork my dad had poured his soul into. But then, a miracle happened. A countermeasure that the two arsonists never could have predicted. The emergency sprinkler system engaged. Thick, heavy blasts of pressurized water violently erupted from concealed nozzles buried deep in the ceiling panels and the surrounding dirt. My father had hardwired a commercial-grade fire suppression system into the residential property years ago. It was a brilliant, paranoid precaution I hadn't even been fully aware of until Harold briefly mentioned it. The aggressive water pressure immediately fought back against the gasoline fire, creating a massive cloud of hissing, suffocating white smoke. On the digital feed, I watched the two masked figures completely freeze in terror as they were drenched in freezing water. Panic set in, and they wildly sprinted across the lawn toward Richard's truck, which they had foolishly parked under a streetlight half a block away. The high-definition camera perfectly captured the vehicle's license plate as they peeled out. I kept the dispatcher on speakerphone until I heard the wailing sirens ripping through the neighborhood. The local fire department arrived on the scene in exactly 7 minutes. Thankfully, my dad's genius sprinklers had already won the battle. The wooden porch was heavily scorched, and the hand-carved railing was totally destroyed, but the actual structure, my father's sanctuary, my new home, survived. The police cruisers arrived seconds later. I stood on the wet grass and played the high-definition footage for the responding officers. The lead cop's eyes bulged when he clearly read the license plate numbers. "We are highly familiar with that specific vehicle," the officer stated grimly, clicking his radio. "We will have them in handcuffs before the sun comes up." There is a very specific, depressing aura that haunts a police precinct at 4 o'clock in the morning. I was numbly sitting in a hard plastic waiting chair, with Harold acting as my silent guardian, watching exhausted officers shuffle through the sterile hallways. A detective named Aaron Brooks finally approached us around 4:30 a.m. He was a heavily built man with massive bags under his eyes and the demeanor of a guy who had witnessed the worst of humanity. "Ms. Ingram," he sighed, dropping into the chair opposite of us. "We have successfully executed 2 arrests. Richard Porter and Diane Porter are currently in custody." I had fully anticipated Richard's arrest, but hearing a police detective officially state my mother's name felt like a physical blow to my ribs. It settled deep in my chest like a block of ice. "We apprehended them at their primary residence," Detective Brooks explained. Mr. Porter was still wearing sweatpants that reeked of unleaded gasoline. When we breached the door, Mrs. Porter was frantically attempting to wipe the hard drive of her cell phone. Brooks opened a massive manila folder. Our cyber forensics team easily recovered the deleted data. We possess a terrifying chain of text messages between the 2 suspects, heavily documenting the premeditation of the arson. They were coordinating the exact timing to ensure maximum property damage. He looked me dead in the eye. "She was fully aware of the plot, Miss Ingram. She wasn't a passive bystander. She actively helped engineer the attack." Harold placed a comforting, steady hand on my trembling shoulder. "If you desire," Brooks offered softly, "you are permitted to visually identify them. But you are under absolutely zero legal obligation to do so." A massive chunk of my brain screamed at me to sprint out of the precinct, jump into my bed, and let the criminal justice system handle the garbage. I never wanted to look at their toxic faces ever again. But there was another voice inside me. It was the voice of the tiny 7-year-old girl who stood on a porch watching her heroic father cry. It was the voice of the teenager who was forced to shrink herself to survive in a hostile home. It was the voice of a fiercely independent woman who had been dragged through the mud for refusing to hand over her dignity. "Yes," I stated, my voice echoing with pure steel. "I want to look at them." The detective escorted me into a dark observation room and positioned me behind a massive pane of one-way glass. My mother was sitting alone at a metal table in interrogation room 2. Her expensive cosmetics were smeared all over her face, and her pristine designer blouse was ruined by soot and dirty sprinkler water. Looking at her through that glass, she didn't resemble the woman who gave birth to me. She just looked like a pathetic, dangerous stranger. As I watched, she began pleading with a different detective, her voice cracking hysterically. "She is my flesh and blood. I would absolutely never do anything to physically harm my own daughter." But she already had. She had literally conspired to set fire to the only tangible legacy my father had left behind. The criminal trial dragged out over 4 agonizing months, but emotionally, it felt like a 4-year marathon. The mountain of evidence the prosecution presented was absolutely devastating. Flawless 4K video footage, recovered text logs proving premeditation, credit card statements showing Richard purchasing the gasoline, and testimonies from 2 separate neighbors who watched the truck speed away. The defense attorneys had absolutely zero room to manufacture reasonable doubt. Richard was the first to take the stand. His highly paid defense lawyer attempted to spin a pathetic narrative about a desperate family man drowning in toxic debt. He claimed Richard's private business was on the verge of bankruptcy, and that securing my inheritance was the only way to save his family from living on the streets. The 12 members of the jury didn't give a damn about his financial woes. They cared about the massive jug of highly flammable liquid, the lighter, and the devastating flames. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all charges. Arson in the first degree and felony conspiracy to commit arson. The judge slammed him with 10 hard years in a state penitentiary, 7 for the actual fire, and a mandatory 3-year enhancement for the criminal conspiracy. He wouldn't even sniff a parole board for at least 6 years. My mother's defense strategy was entirely different. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a tragic victim of domestic abuse, arguing that she was a terrified housewife entirely manipulated and bullied into compliance by her raging husband. He argued she never actually intended for the property to be damaged. The prosecution easily destroyed that fairy tale by displaying her own text messages on a massive projector screen. If we can't seize the bank accounts, then that little brat doesn't get to keep the real estate. Burn the damn thing to the ground. Those were her exact, unedited words. Guilty. Felony conspiracy to commit arson. The judge handed down a 5-year sentence, with a possibility of early parole after 3 years pending perfect behavioral compliance. As the judge formally read the sentencing mandate, my mother slowly turned around to lock eyes with me in the spectator gallery. Her face was completely hollowed out, her eyes bloodshot and dead. She slowly mouthed a silent sentence to me. It only took me a fraction of a second to read her lips. "You'll regret this." It was the exact same toxic threat Richard had screamed in the cafe, and the identical warning they had tried to use in her living room. I didn't flinch. I held her dead stare until the armed bailiff physically grabbed her shoulder and dragged her out of the courtroom. Walking down the massive concrete steps of the courthouse, Harold kept pace right beside me. "How is your heart feeling?" he asked gently. I actually had to ponder that for a moment. Honestly, I don't feel like a victorious winner. I just feel incredibly hollow. "That is standard protocol for surviving a war," Harold replied, giving my arm a reassuring squeeze. "But I promise you, Myra, your father would be bursting with pride today." Hearing that caused the hollow sensation in my chest to shift just enough to let a tiny sliver of peace slip inside. Let me break the fourth wall for a second and ask you a deeply personal question. Do you honestly believe I owe my mother any form of forgiveness? There is a massive crowd of people out there who fiercely argue that family is family, no matter how much blood they draw. But there is another crowd who believes that once a line is crossed with malicious intent, it can never be uncrossed. I genuinely want to read your perspectives on this, so please, drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you have ever been forced to draw a brutal boundary to protect yourself from someone who is supposed to love you, please know that you are not walking that road alone. The aftermath of the trial completely reshaped my existence. The shocking story was quickly picked up by the local news outlets under the sensationalized banner, "Daughter's $1 million inheritance sparks family arson plot." They blurred out my face for the evening broadcast, but anybody who remotely knew my family instantly recognized the footage of the house. My professional life became incredibly awkward for a few months. My engineering colleagues were walking on eggshells around my cubicle. Some offered incredibly uncomfortable, whispered condolences. Others, I could tell, were just morbidly fascinated by the true crime drama of it all. I simply kept my head down, crushed my daily assignments, and constantly reminded my reflection in the mirror that I had absolutely nothing to be embarrassed about. The radioactive fallout within the extended family was a much messier situation. Aunt Linda mailed me a massive, 5-page handwritten letter. She meticulously documented every single detail she could recall from my parents' messy divorce proceedings. She listed out all the horrific lies my mother had force-fed her, and how she was completely blinded to the truth. She concluded the letter by begging for my forgiveness for backing the wrong horse for over 2 decades. Uncle Robert took a far more permanent stance. He completely severed all ties with my mother. He actually drove over to visit me one afternoon, standing awkwardly in my dad's living room, which was proudly my living room now. "I remember watching your father aggressively wiping away tears at your high school graduation," he confessed, staring out the window. I never understood why he was so emotional that day. But sitting in that courtroom, I finally understood. He eventually gave me a hug and left without asking for a single favor or a dime of the inheritance. That genuine respect meant infinitely more to me than any hollow apology ever could. My relationship with Melissa was undeniably the most complex puzzle to solve. She eventually worked up the courage to call me about a week after the judge handed down the prison sentences. Her voice sounded incredibly fragile, a stark contrast to the wildly confident, spoiled golden child who effortlessly got everything she wanted while I was left to rot. "I am definitely not calling to ask for your forgiveness," she stated, her voice shaking. "I am fully aware that I was an active participant in your misery. I sat back and watched them treat you like a worthless piece of garbage, and I never once tried to defend you. I don't have an excuse for that. But I desperately need you to know. I am nothing like her. And I absolutely refuse to turn into her." She let out a heavy, wavering sigh. "I started going to intense therapy. I'm trying to unpack my brain and figure out how much of my personality is actually me, and how much of it is just the toxic programming they forced into my head. That is a massive step, Melissa, I replied, genuinely meaning every word. Do you think maybe we could try hitting the reset button? She asked timidly. Not as loving sisters, but maybe just as two adults who survived the same hurricane? I thought about it for a few seconds. We can certainly try. Exactly 6 months after the trial concluded, Harold summoned me back to my dad's property for one final, monumental meeting. Thomas specifically ordered me to hold on to this, Harold explained as we walked into my dad's old carpentry workshop, the very space he had transformed into a modest home office after liquidating his commercial business. He wanted to guarantee that the legal hurricane was completely over before I handed this over to you. Harold calmly walked over to the massive built-in mahogany bookshelf and pressed his thumb against a hidden latch I had never noticed. A secret wooden panel beautifully popped open, revealing a dark, hidden compartment. Resting perfectly inside was a stunning, hand-carved wooden lockbox, polished until the grain practically glowed. It was the exact caliber of craftsmanship my father strictly reserved for his highest-paying clients. He spent 3 entire months building this box for you, Harold whispered, stepping back to give me space. He swore up and down that it was the most vital piece of woodwork he would ever create in his lifetime. My hands were violently shaking as I reached out and slowly flipped the heavy wooden lid open. Inside lay massive stacks of printed photographs. Dozens and dozens of them. There was a shot of me at 7 years old, flashing a massive gap-toothed grin. A photo of me at 12, proudly hoisting up a regional mathletes trophy. Me at 18, grinning in my graduation gown. Me at 25, firmly shaking hands with the senior partner at my very first corporate engineering firm. I flipped the pictures over. Every single photograph featured a handwritten note scrawled on the back in my dad's messy handwriting. Myra, age 7. The darkest day of my life when I was forced to walk away. I swore a blood oath to myself that I would find my way back to your side. Myra, age 12. I was hiding out in the absolute back row of the school auditorium. You couldn't spot me in the crowd, but I never took my eyes off of you. Myra, age 25. I secretly drove 3 hours in traffic just to watch you confidently stride into that massive corporate tower. My brilliant daughter, the engineer. My chest physically ached with an overwhelming wave of love and sorrow. The very final photograph in the stack was a highly recent one. It was a candid shot of me standing on the sidewalk directly in front of my old apartment complex, clearly taken from a parked car across the avenue. The final note read, "My gorgeous, brilliant girl. Every major milestone you've conquered, you accomplished entirely on your own merit." I literally could not be bursting with more pride. The bank accounts and the real estate? That is just meaningless paper. This box, these captured memories, this is my true legacy to you. This is my absolute proof that I was standing right beside you for your entire life, violently loving you, even during the years you couldn't see my face. I pulled the heavy wooden box tightly against my chest, collapsed onto the floor of his workshop, and completely broke down, sobbing until my lungs burned. It has been exactly 1 year since the gavel banged down at the trial. I permanently live in my dad's house now. Correction, our house. I purposely kept his beloved workshop exactly the way he organized it. It still carries that beautiful, nostalgic scent of raw sawdust and lemon wood polish. His heavy iron tools are still perfectly aligned on the metal pegboard. His massive wooden workbench, the place where he crafted stunning art for people who actually valued his talent, remains untouched in the center of the room. On the rougher nights, I'll brew a hot cup of tea, pull up a stool in that workshop, and just talk out loud to him. Rationally, I know his ears can't process the words. But spiritually, I like to believe he's listening. Either way, it brings me immense peace. The massive financial inheritance is sitting safely secured in a diversified investment portfolio, almost entirely untouched. I still wake up and log hours at my demanding engineering job. I still commute in my reliable, heavily used sedan. My father chose to live a modest life because he fundamentally understood that true wealth provides security, not a flashy platform to show off to strangers. I deeply respect and understand that philosophy now. My mother is currently sitting in a state prison cell. Every now and then, a cheap stamped envelope with her handwriting shows up in my mailbox. I immediately throw them into the trash without opening them. Refusing to read her apologies isn't an act of cruelty, it is an act of extreme self-preservation. Harold was the one who helped me mentally separate those two concepts. Richard still has a mandatory 4 years left on his sentence. Whenever the parole board eventually cuts him loose, I already have a permanent, ironclad restraining order ready to be enforced. The legal machinery operates at a snail's pace, but when pushed, it absolutely works. Melissa swings by the house every couple of months. We are far from being best friends, and, honestly, I have no idea if we will ever cross that threshold. But we are no longer hostile enemies. She is slowly constructing a completely independent life for herself, putting massive distance between her soul and the toxic radiation of our parents' terrible decisions. I genuinely respect her hustle. As for those massive, chaotic extended family reunions I spent my entire youth dreading, I completely boycott them. I don't avoid them out of lingering spite or bitterness. I skip them because this entire nightmare taught me a vital lesson. Biological obligation is absolutely not a substitute for genuine love. Sharing the same DNA sequence does not automatically guarantee loyalty. I grab dinner with Uncle Robert on a monthly basis. Aunt Linda reliably mails me heartfelt holiday cards. Choosing to maintain these small, authentic relationships brings me vastly more joy than the forced, suffocating proximity I endured as a child. I am no longer consumed by rage. Carrying anger is an exhausting, full-time job, and I have vastly superior ways to utilize my energy. However, I am not a naive child anymore. I am hyper-aware of the demonic things human beings are capable of executing when massive amounts of money are dangled in front of them. I witnessed firsthand the terrifying lengths the woman who birthed me was willing to go to. I will absolutely never forget her actions, but I absolutely refuse to let her sins dictate my future. Every once in a while, I step out onto my newly rebuilt front porch, flawlessly reconstructed utilizing the exact architectural blueprints my dad originally drafted, and I stare out at the quiet suburban street where my entire existence was almost reduced to ashes. I replay the terrifying flames, and I remember those high-pressure sprinklers violently exploding to life, acting as if my dad was literally reaching through the fabric of time to shield me from harm one last time. I think about the hidden security cameras quietly documenting every second of the assault. I marvel at the terrifyingly brilliant preparation of a father who fundamentally understood the dark core of his ex-wife better than anybody else on the planet. A man who accepted the brutal reality that certain individuals will never stop hunting you until they either extract every ounce of value from you or utterly destroy what they are denied. My father didn't simply leave me a fat bank account. He gifted me a literal suit of armor. But far more crucial than the legal defenses or the wealth, he granted me absolute permission. He gave me the unbreakable permission to look people in the eye and say no, the permission to construct massive, impenetrable boundaries. The permission to permanently sever ties with individuals who only offer love when it comes with a strict list of conditions and a heavy price tag. Growing up, I was brainwashed into believing that the concept of family meant you were permanently chained to them, regardless of the abuse. I was taught that sharing a bloodline meant you were legally obligated to endlessly forgive their transgressions, absorb their endless insults, and endure their cruelty with a smile. My dad shattered that toxic illusion. He didn't do it with long lectures, he proved it through undeniable actions. He taught me through 20 agonizing years of quiet observation, brilliant strategic planning, and a profound, unwavering love that never once demanded anything in return. If you have stayed with me this far, and you catch a glimpse of your own reflection in my chaotic story, if you have ever been violently minimized by the exact individuals who were morally obligated to protect you, if you have ever been branded as selfish simply for putting up a shield to protect your own sanity, if you have ever laid awake at night questioning if you are legally permitted to finally shout enough, please listen to the absolute truth I had to learn the hard way. You do not owe a single soul on this earth your inherent dignity. Not the people who raised you, not the siblings you grew up with, absolutely nobody. Genuine love is supposed to feel like a warm, comforting blanket, not a high-stress corporate transaction. And setting strict boundaries doesn't mean you are building a massive brick wall to isolate yourself from the world. Boundaries are simply doors that you possess the ultimate key to, giving you the absolute authority to decide exactly who is worthy enough to step inside. My father left me a beautiful piece of real estate. He left me a massive financial safety net. But the genuine inheritance he passed down was infinitely simpler and more priceless than any material asset. He permanently gifted me the absolute right to stand tall. And I swear to you, I will never allow another human being to strip that away from me again. Thank you so incredibly much for sticking with me until the very final second. If this journey resonated with your soul, or if it sparked a realization about the toxic boundaries in your own life, I desperately want to read your perspective down in the comments section. Have you ever been forced to go to war against your own bloodline? How did surviving that conflict change the core of who you are? If you are hungry for more deep dive stories regarding toxic families, epic justice, and individuals finally finding their voice, make sure you hit subscribe and browse the other videos linked in the description below. Stay safe, stand tall, and I will catch you in the next video.